Good morning. I'm Clinay Hetzbeth, Chair of the University Club's Literature and Arts Committee, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to Expo Chicago Director Summit Keynote Address with Julie Trébault, Executive Director of Artists at Risk Connection. Where is she? There you are. And I'm going to go off script just a little bit and say I've had the pleasure of knowing Julie before Expo, and she is a rock star, amazing, and is so vital to all this work. A little bit about the club. The University Club is dedicated to supporting the cultural vibrancy of Chicago. For more than a century, the club has curated a modern contemporary art collection comprised of artists who have called Chicago their home. We also partner with organizations across the city and nationally that highlight creatives across the disciplines and fields. Today's program is an example of the vibrant partnership, and it's our honor to collaborate with Expo Chicago on the Directors Summit, an initiative that gathers an emerging generation of art museum leaders from across the country for a 3-day program response to call equity, inclusion, and sustainable future. Please join me in welcoming Expo Chicago Artistic Director, Kate, I hope I don't mess up your name this time, last name, Sears-Patowski. Yes! Who will introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Commissioner Hetzbeth. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kate Sears-Patowski, Artistic Director of Expo Chicago. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the Director Summit Keynote on the occasion of the exposition's 12th edition. We are proud to celebrate our 4th year of the Director Summit, an initiative that gathers an emerging generation of art museum leaders for a 3-day program of conversations that address museums as the complex structures that they are, structures of mutually interdependent parts that are challenged to heal past histories, protect against present threats, and engage communities. Shaped in partnership with the museum consultant Jill Snyder, right with me in the front. The Director Summit is centered on 2 public roundtable discussions on Expo Chicago's dialogue stage, a closed-door session, and this very keynote presentation. I would like to thank the new international cohort of museum directors who trusted us with their time and initiatives on stage these past 2 days. Our 2025 Director Summit cohort includes Amanda de la Garza from Reina Sofia, Guillaume Desange from Palais de Tokyo, Miles Russell Cook from the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art, Stephanie Hessler from the Swiss Institute, Laura Caroline DeLara from DePaul, and Monetta White from the Museum of African Diaspora. The Director Summit is generously supported by Heritage Auctions and Bloomberg Connects, and directors are supported by the Australian Consulate General in Chicago, Instituto Cervantes of Chicago, and Villa Albertine Consulate General of France in Chicago. I would also like to thank my friend Jill Snyder, again, for her work on this program the last 4 years, my colleague Megan Foy for her tremendous work on making this program come to fruition, and Alexandra Maddock and Rena Rinaldi from the University Club of Chicago for continuing to collaborate with us on this standout event. Now, to introduce our keynote. Julie Trébault is Executive Director of the Artists at Risk Connection, an independent organization that defends and advances the right to artistic freedom, providing practical resources and support to ensure that artists and cultural professionals can live and work safely without fear. A highly respected leader in the art world, she previously served as Director of Public Programs at the Museum of the City of New York, where she built a robust roster of panel discussions, performances, screenings, and symposia spanning New York City's arts, culture, and history. Prior to that, she was Director of Public Programs at the Center for Architecture. Before moving to New York, she worked at a National Museum of Ethnology in the Netherlands, where she built a network of 116 museums across the globe that shared a virtual collection of masterpieces and developed an innovative array of online and mobile applications and exhibitions to make the collection as widely accessible as possible. From 2004 until 2007, she was head of higher education and academic events at the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris, where she conceived and implemented a policy for higher education by creating an international network of universities, graduate schools, and research institutes. Trébault holds a master's degree in arts administration from the Sorbonne University, a master's degree in archaeology from the University of Strasbourg, and taught at Fordham University. Now, please welcome Julie to the stage.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Keynote and Kate, for these lovely introductions. It's really an honor for me to be with you among so many visionary leaders in the arts. And first, I would like also to extend my heartfelt thanks first to Jill Schneider. Thank you, Jill. Thank you for having me. To the dynamo behind Expo Chicago and the summit, also Megan Foy, and of course Kate Chapisky, almost there with a family name, I have to say, and the whole Expo Chicago team for making this summit possible. So my name is Julie Trébault, and I'm the Artists at Risk Connection Executive Director. Let's try this presentation.
Konnichiwa, pussies. I'm the lowbrow gag queen mangaka Rokude Nashiko. I wanted to make bigger pussies. The police saw this as evidence of so-called obscenity. July 12, 2014, I was arrested.
Sexuality is a taboo. Anything there is sex involved, it makes people uncomfortable. Because of my work, I was getting threat from the religious extremists. I can get killed.
They push artists to censor themselves.
I just want to tell you that I'm not afraid.
So, for those unfamiliar with our work, ARC is a global organization that provides a lifeline support to artists and cultural workers who have threats simply for daring to create. We don't just protect individuals, we stand as allies with the cultural organization that fight every day to defend artistic freedom. At the heart of our work is the belief that art is a fundamental human right. That's why we bring together partners across the world, from the arts to human rights sectors, to provide life-saving assistance, strengthen cultural resilience, and fight for a world where artists can safely preserve and shape their identities. Since our inception in 2017, we have supported over 2,000 artists from 61 countries who, against all odds, continue to inspire us to imagine a different reality, amplify silent histories, and ignite critical dialogue. But we cannot do this alone. These artists we support are heard when institutions like yours, museums with the potential to amplify marginalized voices, make the conscious and courageous decision to do so. As stewards, not only for the arts, but of the living, breathing stories behind it, you are indispensable allies in defending artistic freedom and ensuring equitable access to culture for all. Today, across the world, we are witnessing a sharp and deliberate rollback of freedoms. We are living through a surge of authoritarianism, one that is reshaping our civic and cultural landscapes. Sometimes it comes with brute force, but more often it slips in quietly through censorship disguised as policy, cultural erasure packaged as reform, or fear dressed up as patriotism. From Germany, where exhibitions are increasingly cancelled and artists' views are policed, to Brazil, where indigenous artists and curators face institutional resistance for depicting indigenous narrative critical of colonial legacies, or to India, where artists are surveilled, harassed, and jailed. Here, at home, in the United States, a country once seen as a safe haven, a sanctuary for artistic freedom, we are witnessing a complete cooptation of our cultural sector for political gain. Major cultural institutions like the Kennedy Center, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and the Smithsonian are under unfathomable pressure. Changes to grant requirements from the National Endowment for the Arts or the National Endowment for Humanities are affecting countless museums across the country, leaving them caught between the need for funding and the responsibility to protect artistic freedom. At ARC, we are hearing directly from artists impacted by the closing of civic space here in the US, queer and trans artists being quietly removed from programs, exhibition cancelled without explanation, grants revoked. It is a part, after seeing also artists as seeking asylum overseas. This is not a series of isolated incidents. It is a part of a broader, calculated campaign to redefine what art is allowed to say and to dismantle spaces that bring us together in creating and constructive dialogue. One might ask, how did we arrive at this point? In reality, political overreach is only a symptom of something deeper and more enduring: social polarization. It grows slowly, fed by unresolved histories, eroded trust, and widening fractures in our collective understanding. We cannot analyze the pressures facing the cultural sector in isolation. They are deeply rooted in larger historical trends. While the United States has never been immune to censorship, culture wars, or political interference in the arts, what we have witnessed in recent years marks a very troubling escalation. Democratic norms are being steadily eroded through increasingly aggressive shifts in rhetoric, policy, and political will. The intensity of today's attacks on cultural programming, identity, heritage, and free expression is more coordinated and more dangerous than anything we have seen in decades. In many ways, warning signs for these trends happen at the local and state level quite early on. From Florida's Don't Say Gay legislation to sweeping book bans targeting race and gender, to executive order dismantling DEI initiatives and attacking so-called gender ideology at the federal level. Project 2025 made explicit what many of us had seen coming for years. Cultural and educational spaces are ideological battlegrounds. It's not a warning, it is a declaration. The current moment is a culmination of decade-long culture wars that have slowly but surely chipped away at the democratic cornerstone of this country through shifting rhetoric, hostile policy, and permissiveness for the idea that culture can or should be controlled. At ARC, we have seen this playbook before. Across the world, we have watched how authoritarianism gains ground, thriving on fear and isolation. And we are seeing those forces more effectively emboldened, clearly unmistakably here in the US in public discourse and policy. And yet, the collective power held by those in this room today is immense. Museums, by their very nature, are an antidote to authoritarianism, precisely because they create a sense of community, build connection, uplift narratives, and hold space for contested memory. Museums remind us that democracy is not just a system, it is a culture. And just by preserving that role, museums engage in an act of defiance. I recall a Congolese sculptor we supported during a period of political upheaval. He once told me that it was not financial aid, crucial that it was, that changed the course of his life. It was an invitation from a small European museum that held artifacts taken from his homeland by the old colonial authorities. There he was asked to speak with local school children about the objects, their histories, and what they still meant today for his community. That encounter with young minds, historical objects, and living memory sparked something powerful. The museum became a contact zone, as anthropologists like Benoît de l'Étoile call it, a space where past and present meet, where difficult conversations happen, and where transformation begins. In divided times, when voices are silenced and history erased, museums hold the power not as static repositories, but as living, participatory spaces of connection, empathy, and transformation. The French novelist and first Minister of Cultural Affairs, André Malraux, called this the imaginary museum, a space that's defined by walls, but by what art allows us to carry in our mind. He believed that artwork could create, even in a reproduction, a kind of mental museum, a shared cultural consciousness, one that connects people across borders and differences. Malraux saw museums not just as custodians of objects. They are places to spark imagination. I'm sorry to be that French. I'm giving another French philosopher. We have the influence we can. So, philosopher Michel Foucault took this idea further. His vision of museums is of a space where power, memory, and identity collide. He claimed that a museum doesn't just preserve history, it edits it. It decides what is seen, what is valued, what is forgotten. And in that decision-making lies a profound responsibility. For much of their history, museums were viewed as impartial and objective places where visitors could view objects of historical or cultural significance. Of course, these objects were often plundered through conquest, and institutions were largely detached from questions of ethics. But the discourses and reflection that underpin our world have become more diverse, more complex. As people confront issues such as immigration, racial justice, and the legacy of colonialism, museums have been challenged to reassess their roles. They now have a broader and more dynamic responsibility, critically engaging with the difficult past, providing context, and provoking reflection. They influence how we understand ourselves, our communities, our world. And when they do that, with honesty, with humility, and with openness, they become places of transformation, places that not only inform, but challenge. They affirm identity while also urging visitors to confront deeply held beliefs. As American artivist and former museum director Nina Simon says, the most powerful museums are radically welcoming institutions that are not just inclusive in policy, but also in practice. They don't just open their doors, they build trust. They make people feel seen, not just counted. A powerful example of this duality is The Bias Inside Us, a national traveling exhibition and community engagement project developed by the Smithsonian that explore the science of implicit bias. Through interactive exhibition, visual storytelling, and public programming, the power of museums is revealed. These are spaces that foster challenging personal introspection and conversation between communities. Rooted in participation, inclusion, and dialogue, the initiative illuminates just how pervasive implicit bias is. Through lived experiences and testimonials, The Bias Inside Us highlight diverse marginalized voices. It also positions them as subject of analysis, but as agent of insight and social critique. By placing these voices at the center of their own narratives, the exhibition disrupts traditional hierarchies of expert versus audience. Experiential knowledge becomes powerful truth-telling, aligning with Foucault's idea of museums as spaces of counter-memory. In this paradigm, marginalized voices are given prominence and dominant historical narratives are reappraised and or contested. In a time of growing fear and hatred of the other, anti-immigrant sentiment and social polarization, I see encounters like The Bias Inside Us crucial. Spaces where individuals can confront the real-life harms of authoring and be challenged to recognize their own role in bias and structures of prejudice are immensely valuable. But not all efforts are as direct. Sometimes it's subtle. The Louvre Abu Dhabi put this approach into practice by curating exhibitions around universal themes such as motherhood, faith, or trade. The museum draws connections across cultures without collapsing their uniqueness. By weaving together diverse cultural narratives with a common spirit running through them, the museum builds a sense of shared humanity and transcends political divides. Visitors can see connections between seemingly disparate groups, even those they may view as enemies. They begin to see common threads, not only in arts, but in humanity itself. This focus on communality and shared experience, however, does not mean that museums should shy away from historically engaged and challenging approaches to curation. Quite the opposite. In fact, the power of museums to achieve this lies in their ability to instruct without dogma and pressure and foster encounters that continue to strike at the heart of what brings us together. The space that museums create are not merely passive sites of contemplation. They are active, living environments. and they offer something increasingly rare in our society, a space to reconnect with what makes us human. That, in itself, is no small thing, especially now. I want also to say that this is against the backdrop of 2024 for being like one of the worst years for artistic freedom in recent history, with 2025 anticipated to reach an all-time low. So when society needs artistic reflection and dialogue the most, when we desperately need spaces for nuance, questioning, and dissent, museums may be one of the few remaining public forums where this kind of engagement is possible and happen. If we return to the idea of the museum as a contact zone, a space of encounter between perspectives, cultures, and histories, then we also must reckon with the power that comes with that role. Reckoning, outside of taking accountability, is a process of reconnection. What museums do with that connection, how they deepen it through education, participation, and community action, is what defines their broader civic and cultural role. Like the boundless nature of Malraux Imaginary Museum, the expectation for museums to engage the public extend beyond solely exhibition to include making meaningful contributions to the social fabric of the local communities. Museums are not only places where visitors can come to learn. They are increasingly expected to evolve alongside the communities they serve. In today's climate, adaptive engagement is not an add-on. It's a core to museums' public responsibility. By positioning themselves as civic anchors, museums are among the most trusted institutions in our society, meeting audiences with opportunity for co-creation, reflection, and shared ownership of programming. In times as fractured and uncertain as this, that trust becomes even more critical, offering a rare foundation of continuity, reflection, and collective imagination. The Living Museum of the New South in Charlotte exemplifies this approach with its long commitment to public engagement. The museum has famously not shied away from confronting the painful history of the region head-on, curating bold exhibition about topic of racial terror and the Jim Crow era with the collaboration of the Equal Justice Initiative. But it also thought to foster broader civic engagement, partnering with the League of Women Voters to provide voter registration opportunity at public programming in the museum, and creating interactive content about suffrage for all age groups. This is a museum that sees itself as part of the civic ecosystem. Institutions themselves also need to look within, especially in a climate of heightened pressure on expression. Beyond content or programming, fundamental conceptions about museum structures and power must be realigned. We often speak about decolonization as a primary framework, and it remains critical, but today's moment demands broader institutional self-examination. Museums are increasingly asked to reconsider the origin of their collections, centering on honest reflections on the fundamental systems they have shaped, how they govern, curate, and engage with the public. One of the most visible layers of such reckonings has been the question of restitution. Across Europe and the Americas, institutions are grappling with the histories behind the objects they house. Many of them acquire in context of violence, extraction, and coercion. The return of looted artifacts from the Musée du quai Branly in Paris to Benin, for example, has sparked vital conversation on both sides of the debate about cultural ownership, stewardship, and repair. For years, the museum has been a focal point of emerging debates about dispute collection and restitution efforts. But honestly, this was not always the case. I remember from my own time at the museum that this conversation was spoken in hushed whisper, which rose eventually into open speech. I believe that the 2018 report on the restitution of African cultural heritage did much to facilitate this shift in France and abroad. Written by Senegalese academic and writer Welwan Sarr and French art historian Bénédicte Savoy, and commissioned by the French state, it marked the first time a French president announced the restitution of African artifacts. Since then, it has prompted numerous debates and plans for the decolonization of museums across the world. It opened the door to urgent questions about colonial legacies, institutional accountability, and what it truly means to decolonize a museum. At the Quai Branly, I was struck by the institution's attempt to engage with these complexities of power, even if imperfected. One moment that stayed with me was the decision to commission 8 Aboriginal artists from different communities in Australia to paint the ceiling and facade of the new wing of the building. The decision to integrate millennia-old artistic tradition directly into the museum's architecture was not simply decorative. It signaled a shift, a desire to recognize indigenous artists as contemporary creators and to embed their work in the institutional fabric itself. While no single commission can undo colonial histories, it was to me a step forward, reimagining the museum as a space of dialogue and co-authorship, rather than one as appropriation or erasure. Going back to the importance of honest reflection on fundamental systems that have shaped museum operations, we are confronted by a slew of consequential questions. Who get the privilege to curate? Who interprets? Whose voices meaningfully shape the narrative? We have seen a growing number of initiatives aimed at diversifying cultural leadership in response to this recognition of institutional shift in this sector. From Mellon Funding Fellowship to new governance structures that share authority with artists and community members. At the Baltimore Museum of Arts, for instance, artists have been brought into curatorial processes in meaningful ways, helping reshape exhibitions, public programs, and acquisition. These changes are not always easy, but they reflect a willingness to reimagine how expertise is defined and where it comes from. To allow meaningful institutional shifts to shape what can be shown, museums must also democratize who holds the power to make curatorial decisions, invest in different perspectives, and rebuild institutional structures to protect and encourage creative and intellectual autonomy. We all have followed the ongoing debate around accountability, donors, values, and the ethical dilemmas that can emerge when funding sources are at odds with institutional missions. The Whitney Biennale's experience brought this into sharp relief, but these tensions are not unique to any one museum. These questions are becoming even more urgent as public funding across the US and Europe is reduced, and in some cases, conditioned on ideological conformity. And perhaps this is a moment to recognize that our sector can no longer afford to operate in unheralded assumptions, and instead, this is the time when our cultural institutions must actively earn and sustain their social license to operate through a demonstrated commitment to the communities they serve. But perhaps nowhere is the tension between institutional responsibility and public pleasure more visible than in the growing wave of censorship facing museums today. As museums strive to be more inclusive, accountable, and transparent, they do so in an environment where artistic and curatorial freedom is increasingly contested. Last summer, ARC partnered with the Association of Art Museum Directors and Pan America to better understand how censorship is playing out across American museums, not only in headline-grabbing controversies, but in the quieter, often unseen pressures shaping institutional decision-making. More than half of museum directors surveyed saw censorship as a greater threat than it was a decade ago. Nearly 2/3 had faced pressure to exclude or alter content, and almost half of those incidents occur within the last 3 years. What stood out most in our conversations was the presence of censorship, true. But even more was the ambiguity of it. Many museums leaders described what came to call a kind of a gray zone, where the line between curatorial judgment and self-censorship becomes blurred, especially on controversial topics. Where decisions are not always dictated by direct orders or public outrage, but by a quieter, more insidious calculus by different actors. Can we take this risk? Will this affect our funding? Will this exhibition will be misunderstood? Most recently, last December, the Modern Art Museum of Wordsworth in Texas displays works from renowned American photographer Sally Mann, which included intimate portraits of her own children. Despite the work being part of a broader exhibition and previously displayed in major institutions, local officials labeled them as inappropriate, leading to the seizure by the police of the work and the pursuit of criminal investigation. Also, the charges were dropped. The chilling effect continues to linger. It's in these moments when institutions start anticipating backlash before it even arrives that censorship takes a subtler and arguably more dangerous form. This is especially concerning given that over 90% of museum directors we survey report having no clear institutional policies on censorship. This often means that more artists will intentionally or out of mere fear be forced into silence. At ARC, we have witnessed the impact of this firsthand. In the past quarter alone, the number of US-based artists seeking assistance from us has surged dramatically. From 0 to more, we have more than 20 active cases since January. We have responded to cases where artist exhibitions were pulled without explanation, where artists had public grants revoked mid-project, where creators were doxxed, harassed, and threatened for addressing themes such as queerness, Palestinian identity, or racial justice. For artists, the consequences are profound. Beyond the loss of funding or institutional support, many face reputational damage, career stagnation, and personal risk. Some have been removed from academic programs and residencies after political vetting. Others have watched years of work disappear in a matter of days. Many now self-censor before a single word is written or a brushstroke made, choosing silence over risk. This is the cost of inaction to individual artists, which then becomes a cost to the whole cultural fabric of our society. In this moment, when the attacks on the cultural sector are strategic, coordinated, and sustained, defending artistic freedom means defending the sector itself. This is a critical moment. It begs us to think together, collaboratively, intentionally, and with courage. Where do we go from here? What role can we all play in safeguarding the sector and the very core values it was built on? Today, here in this room, so many museums are represented, woven together by shared purpose and collective strengths. If this network stands in unity, if institutions rally to defend one another when any one of them is under attack, it can become a force too powerful to ignore. A force capable of shaping not only the future of the cultural sector, but the broader civic space we all inhabit. Cultural institutions and museums must also build alliances that span civil liberty groups, advocacy organizations, independent media, legal networks, and beyond. Cross-sectorial alliances will be effective to me. Our strength lies in shared action. This is how we protect our collective agency. And perhaps, more critically, we should all work for artists, recognizing them when they are where they are being targeted for who they are and what they express, and taking the risk to stand with them for their sake and for the collective good in the field, as a kind of act of solidarity and institutional integrity. In adhering to their profoundly necessary roles, museums are pillars of democracy and spaces of trust where truths are not feared but explored. Complexity is not silenced but held, and where freedom is not just tolerated but celebrated. Thank you.